Welcome back to Admit It with Alexis White. Let's talk legacy. Okay, so in the college admissions process, legacy has always been a thing. What is legacy? So, your parents went to USC or your, grandma went to Stanford or whatever. And the idea behind legacy would be that that would be considered in your admissions process. When you send your application, you let them know grandma went here, dad went here, mom went here, and they're supposed to, if legacy admissions practices are in place, they're supposed to look at that and go, oh, like we have a longstanding relationship with this family. So that's going to affect our decision. That's going to affect whether or not we take this kid, or we're going to see them in a positive light. So legacy piggybacks on a lot of different concepts in the college admissions process that I want to address, a lot of which have to do with connections. People are always like, if I have a connection at this school, is it going to help me? So I want to talk about that first. Connections. Connections at admissions should really be generally reserved for people you might know on the board of that school, people you might know who teach at that school, people you might know who are such significant existing players on that school's campus that it's a major, major, major deal. Like they have a library that's named after them. Okay. If you have a connection to a school, that does not mean you're automatically going to get into that school. It does not mean, there's a lot of things it does not mean, but that is definitely one of them. It does not mean oh, I know, Joseph Randall, who built the Randall Library. Joseph Randall might be your neighbor. It's better, obviously, if he's your uncle, or if it's better if he's your parents' business partner, or if he's your godfather. Okay, because he actually knows you and can speak to who you are. Connections like that definitely could move the needle. I keep using that expression, moving the needle, but I feel like in admissions, there's so much kind of almost there stuff. Could a letter from that person or a phone call from that person make a difference? Yeah. But when people go, my boss went to Middlebury, do you think that helps? Your boss is not unless your boss has a library named after him or her, or they have a foundation named after him or her or whatever, their commitment to that school is so robust that there's a chance that the school might be negatively affected by not being able to take you. That's not going to work. So I have had clients that I've worked with who were billionaires. And I've sat in on some of what they call developmental calls. A developmental office is the office at the university that is in charge of raising money for the university. And there's a reason why I'm talking about this, you guys, because universities exist on endowments and donations and federal funding. They don't just, tuition doesn't cut it, guys, which is, it's wild to think that some of these schools are $80,000 a year and tuition is not going to cut it. It's kind of like my kids go to a private school. I still have to, make a donation every year. Kind of wild. I'm paying for tuition. And that's because these institutions are extremely expensive to run. And I know a lot of people go, higher education is way too expensive at some of these schools. Yeah. But when you do actually look at what some of the schools are offering, it's pretty staggering. And it's incredible. The facilities, the level of education, the level of teaching, faculty has to be paid. Research facilities have to be maintained. Just keeping the lights on is an exorbitant amount of money. I'm not defending their tuition. Maybe I am defending their tuition, depending on the school. But I will say that, and then there are different states that have better modes of funding than other states do. Like the UC system is the worst when it comes to funding. Like when I went to UCLA in 2023 and we did a tour there, the grounds of UCLA are beautiful. That's always been a big selling point for them. They have a gorgeous campus. But when I walked into the cafe where I used to study and, different classrooms and stuff, I was like, nothing's changed in 30 years. What's happening here? But if you go to the campus at Ohio State, and you walk into those libraries and those cafes and those food halls, it's pretty crazy. Now, you might look at a state like Ohio and go, well, the cost of living is so much lower. The cost of real estate is so much lower. They can afford to invest in XYZ, but then and the taxes are lower and all that stuff. But when you look at the state of California and you think, but I'm paying those taxes, but I'm contributing to this fund. Where is it all going? It all seems very mismanaged and all that. So anyway, schools have to exist on donations. That is just a fact of how this works, okay? That is business in higher education. Connections. So everyone thinks that because they have a connection, that's a money connection, that could actually give them a leg up in admissions. And sometimes it definitely can, and sometimes it really doesn't move the needle. There's that expression again, moving the needle. I'm going to try not to say it again. So the big connection and the thing that really is what has always made the game is legacy. That game is something that's been institutionalized in our country's history, basically practically since the founding fathers. You're talking about Ivy League schools that had, Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, establishing UVA. I mean, that's not an Ivy League, but the point is, those roots are very, very deep, and they go, obviously, there's legacies of presidents and legacies of other politicians and scientists and diplomats and all that stuff. So if you're, let's say, what we would call a double legacy at Penn, that means that your grandparent or grandparents went there and your parent or parents went there, and now you're next in line. Should that give you a leg up in admissions? Does it feel like that's something that should be considered as part of your profile? I've always been of the mind that it should. I feel that these deep, long-standing relationships are integral in a lot of respects to the fabric of the school. Now, I know that that's an issue with equity and inclusion and makes things complicated. And there are ways around that as far as making sure, obviously, a student is qualified, that they meet the GPA threshold, that they meet the testing threshold, whatever it is, that it's not the old school USC, and we're going to get to that. The sort of backdoor, my kid is a 3.2, but everyone in my family went to this school, they're going to get in. That feels gross to me. I mean, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm hoping that, so for example, like I went to a private school here in Los Angeles. I was a very, very active volunteer at that school for many years. I donated funds to the school. And, with the expectation, I suppose, and maybe I was ignorant, or maybe that's crazy, or with the hope that perhaps if I had a daughter who was an all-girls school, that she would, continue that legacy, that family connection, that thing. I never ended up having a daughter. So that kind of went out the window. But if I did have a daughter and she was academically qualified for the school and a fit holistically for the school, like her vibe matched what they're looking for, and she didn't get in, I would be not happy. I'd be like, I put my blood, sweat, and tears into this school. I worked my butt off when I was here. I've been volunteering for years. I've been giving money. Like, really? I mean, now, if she were not a qualified applicant, and admissions called me and said, look, we love you, we love you, but we don't think Jane is going to be a fit here. Of course, I work in this world. I understand that I want my kid to be successful. And if that's not the fit for the kid, then that's not the fit for the kid, which leads me back to legacy admissions in the first place. The school should, for all intents and purposes, be a relative fit for the kid. Holistically, meaning like the culture of the school, the vibe of the school, the size of the school, what the school offers academically, that should all pretty much answer the call. If that's mostly in place. Now, grades. As far as I've always seen it, grades could kind of be like maybe a tick possibly below what they would maybe normally look at, but that if the kid is a legacy, then that might, help. I'm not going to say the thing I keep saying, might help push them in. I think that's fair to say. I think that these schools exist on their endowments and those donations. And if you break the legacy chain, you might find yourself in a pickle financially. And this all sounds really bougie and moneyed and big, but it's also important to consider what these people do for the schools. They build the libraries. They build the athletic facilities. They build the centers for performing. They build the centers for performing arts. This is how you get those things. Otherwise, you don't have the facilities that you want. You don't have the modernization. You don't have the, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so building, or the, that stuff is how the school works. It is what keeps driving the institution, and these institutions are supposed to help bring in the next generation of great thinkers, change makers, policymakers, and people who are going to hopefully do some good in this wild ass world. Okay. So what came about in the last few years has been that a lot of schools have decided to dump legacy admissions, to not see that relationship as a factor in the admissions process. This piggybacks on the U.S. Supreme Court's 2023 ruling against affirmative action being used in college admissions. A bunch of schools a bunch of schools made decisions to get rid of legacy admissions because they felt like that was part of the processes of admissions that were not contributing to equity. And they felt like, well, if we can't use affirmative action and then we're also still supporting legacy admissions, then we're like really, catering to a specific type of student. Schools like MIT, Carleton College, LMU, Wesleyan, Virginia Tech, a ton of them got rid of legacy admissions. And then there was a ruling in the state of California that essentially banned legacy admissions as well. So here you are in California with one of the most storied legacy schools in the history of the country, University of Southern California. USC has been the sort of Nepo baby school of all schools for decades. Okay, so it's like, I would say, and at my high school, people for generations, and it was a very old school, would go to USC because their families practically started the school. That was the LA legacy piece of it. The Doheny's, the Annenbergs, people who basically helped to build the city of Los Angeles, they went to USC. That's just what you did, and you were going to get in because you were those people. So then USC starts really ramping up their admissions guidelines and essentially like really raising the bar academically. And then we find that it's not just enough to have a 3.2 and have your mom having gone to USC and then you're just going to go there. It stopped kind of working like that. And USC becomes this pillar of, I guess you would call it, of scandal. USC becomes this pillar of scandal with the Varsity Blues situation. And I can speak from experience because I had people who were involved in the Varsity Blues situation call me, and I'm not naming names, but call me and want me to help them with admissions. And when I heard the stats of their students, their kids, I said, these are the schools I would recommend for your kid. And those particular people would say, or said, I want USC. I don't want ASU. I want USC, or I don't want this one. I'll die if my kid gets into blah, blah, and not blah, blah. And I thought, well, you're really like living on another planet. This is never happening for you. I don't think we're a fit, but hopefully you find somebody that works for you. I will never forget, this client called me the morning the Varsity Blues scandal broke. It was like 6 a.m. And she goes, remember when I told you I met with that guy, Rick Singer? And I was like, yeah. And she said, remember when I said I didn't think he was a fit for us as a counselor because he seemed really shady and he was telling me all about these like backdoor deals that I could make to get my daughter into blah, blah, blah. And I go, yeah. She goes, open up your computer, turn on your phone, whatever, like look at what just broke. So USC just has not been in a great place with all of that stuff. So I think that they were really trying to figure out that aspect of their image and, steering themselves away from legacy admissions as if it were part of that kind of scandalous uniform. But it really wasn't. I mean, if your parent went to that school and you were passionate about that school and your grandparent went to that school, that's not the same thing as lying to get into that school. That's not the same thing as making up an entirely fake profile. That's not the same thing as committing a crime to get into that school. Okay, well, what do we think happens, right? If you stop paying attention to legacy, what do you stop getting? Money. And how do you think these schools exist? So everyone's waking up and going, I think we might need to take a look at our books, because I think that that's what they're ultimately doing, is going, our endowment situation's not looking so hot. Like, when we're looking at the sort of 25-year projection and we're steering away from people who and by the way, as a legacy, it doesn't necessarily mean just because your mom went to the school, it doesn't mean that they give money. It doesn't mean that your mom has any money. But when you consider that relationship and you stick with the spine of that relationship, the hope and the faith is ultimately that that person will, if they have the means, that they will support the school. Okay. So, hence the news that just broke, which is that USC is reinstating legacy admissions. Okay, so how does this work? USC is going to continue. Well, I'm not going to say, okay, USC is going to continue legacy admissions. I don't know that they ever stopped or said that they were going to stop, but they basically made a big announcement. They're going to go against the 2024 California ruling that they have to, that they can't consider legacy admissions, and they're doing it anyway. Stanford's doing the same thing. Let's talk about USC though. Okay, so the president says that they are officially, they announced that they're breaking a California law that went into effect September 1st that prohibits the consideration at private universities. Okay. Jeff Bezos has hedges in front of his house in Beverly Hills that are extremely tall. They're taller than any hedges you would see pretty much anywhere in the city of Beverly Hills. Somebody told me that he pays a monthly fine to have hedges that tall for security purposes. It kind of feels like that. They're saying, President Bong Soo Kim is saying, we're just not going to follow this rule. Okay, so what are the consequences? What does that even mean? Well, it says that USC will have to report legacy and donor admission rates compared to standard rates. Okay, big slap on the wrist, who really cares? As well as specific information about newly enrolled students. Financial penalties for continuing to consider legacy status and admissions were removed during the legislative process. So they're not paying a fine. They basically just have to say, this is the admissions rate for people who are donors and legacies, and this is the admissions rate for people that aren't. What will probably end up happening is that USC's admissions rate is going to go up because they're probably going to be taking more people that are maybe a little less qualified because they're related to donors/legacy. That's either going to impact them positively or negatively. It might ultimately affect their reputation because we might be living again in the early aughts or the 80s or the 90s when I was growing up and USC was the University of Spoiled Children. I mean, that might be we might be getting more of that reputation again. And by the way, fine. My husband went to USC. He has incredible connections from his time there. He wrote a TV show for Netflix and partnered with somebody he went to USC with. He feels very connected to the school. He was not a great student in high school. Okay. He got in, now not because he was a legacy by any means, but they had much higher admissions rates then. If one of my kids wanted to go to USC and we continued a longstanding relationship with the school, I would be thrilled for one of my kids to go. And I would be thrilled to continue that legacy. And that's saying a lot as a Bruin, you guys. But I was talking to you about the UCLA facilities, I did love my time at UCLA, and I think it's a wonderful school, and you have amazing teachers and all that. But anyway, it's complicated. So I think that if you have that kind of relationship with a school, that there should be some preference for it. It just feels Like if you're a frequent flyer, okay, like you're somebody who goes to a certain restaurant all the time, like you're getting a nice table. You're getting the miles. You're getting upgraded. Consistent commitment and relationship to a school, and I know a lot of that's attached to money. But time is money also. And a lot of it is attached to continued relationships and volunteering and contributing your professionalism and whatever you can to the student body. Now, by the way, I'm saying as an alum, whatever you feel like you can do to continue that backbone of connection might be helpful to your kids in the end. And ultimately, it's helpful for the school. You never know who your kid is going to end up being. Your kid might end up being the next person who builds the most important research facility at University of blank. And that facility ends up sending the next satellite to Mars. That may have happened because of a legacy relationship. So there's a lot to unpack here. We can keep these conversations going. Let's go to questions, though, which is my favorite part of Admit It, because I love it when people admit that they have questions and they admit that they don't know everything. And that's the best part of this. I love this question. What is a target school when everything feels like a reach nowadays? That's such a good question. I'm finding myself recommending schools that are hovering in the sort of 60 to 80% range that would generally be a safety school for most people, as kind of, depending on the GPA, like if you have like, let's say a 3.3 or a 3.4, those schools are target schools, right? A 60% is a target school for that person. If you're really thinking like, I want a list of schools that I can get into. Yeah, I'm a great student or I'm a good student. I just don't want to be applying to 8 schools that have, a 22% admissions rate, which is not great. That's not a target if you're even an above average student. So I would say looking at those schools that have a sweet spot, a 60% acceptance sweet spot is really going to be a great fit as far as a target. And every school is not a reach school. Schools that are reach schools are, and again, it depends on the student you are. If you have a 2.5 GPA, a school that has a 60% acceptance rate is not going to be a fit for you. You're not going to get in. So that's tricky. You need the 80%er, the 89%er for that GPA. Or going to community college is a great idea because then you can increase your GPA and then apply it, in a lot of respects to schools that would have been major reach schools in another world for you. When you take a class through your high school, we selected dual enrollment, and then it asks, what degree did you earn? Do we just keep that blank? We received 3 credits. You don't earn a degree from dual enrollment, and there's no star actually next to that question, so you don't even have to answer it. Also, if you take a 2-week college program, should you include that here? Is there any reason you would not want to include it here, for example, if other colleges see it? No, you can absolutely include it. If you take a college course for 2 weeks over the summer or whatever, include it in the colleges and universities section of the Common Application. And again, you didn't earn a degree and you did it over the summer and you can just put it there. That's a totally fine place to put it. And no, other colleges don't care that you took a college class. That's not, in fact, I feel like it would be the opposite. You're like, oh, that's so cool that you did that. I mean, and most of those programs are pay to play programs anyway. So it's not really something you want to put too much attention towards on your application. Do you feel that University of Arizona is harder to get into now that rolling admission has changed and the essay has changed? Also, which schools are definitely not requiring SAT for class of 2027? Whew. Okay. I don't think University of Arizona is going to be harder to get into. I think that wasn't the point. I think that the point was they're always going to be a university that focuses on accessibility and inclusivity. That is their jam. I highly doubt they're ever really going to get out of that 80% admissions rate. Maybe they'll drop down to 70, but I highly doubt it. Okay, but why did they do this? I think they're taking the pressure off their admissions office. They may very well also be moving towards an early decision plan because they want a sure thing. And they want students that actually aren't applying there because it's a safety or because it's their sloppy fifth school or whatever. They really want the real deal, and I think they're sick of looky-loos. That seems to be the thing that's happening. It's like Michigan's sick of looky-loos. So many of these schools at USC, a lot of the schools are like, stop shopping and come here already. Tulane kind of, changed that game ultimately with the ED process. Not that I think that Arizona is headed in that direction whatsoever and going to all of a sudden have a 10% acceptance rate for early action or regular decision. But I think that Arizona is just maybe wants a few less applicants because it makes life in their office a little easier. And a lot of those applicants are either not fits or they're just not going to come. Or that's, I guess, not fits and they're not going to come. That could probably just work together. So the essay, by the way, contrary to popular belief, is optional. Now, I am having most of my students do the essay because it kind of scared me a little bit. And I did feel, to be honest, like was kind of like, ooh, if you don't do the essay, does that mean you're not going to get it? Like, what? And I know in my heart of hearts that that's not true, especially if you're a high performing student and the school is a safety for you, but it just made me feel like a little uneasy. I think that what that does, though, is that it deters people from applying who really aren't into it. And that's their goal. They want kids to come and stay. Also, which schools are definitely not requiring the SAT for class of 2027? We will not know that answer until about January of 2026, which is really annoying. But that is around the time that like Ohio State made their decision, that Miami made their decision. It was just like really late in the game. So I don't think that I can definitively say that. I mean, I think obviously schools like, Wesleyan, okay, they've been test optional for the better part of 15 years. Like the schools that have always been test optional are not changing. It's the schools like USC that I'm watching. Wisconsin, I'm watching that one. Michigan, I'm watching that one. Those are the schools where I'm like, if those schools are on your list, you had better be pursuing the SAT or the ACT because that might change real quick. So keep an eye out this winter for things changing. Is it true that there may be better chances of getting into state schools with the decrease in the class of 2026? Okay, the decrease in class of 2026. Why are we seeing that? We're seeing that because there was a population decline due to the recession in 2007. We are seeing also the decrease in federal funding, decrease in international students. So all that stuff definitely affects state schools. And when people say state schools, they mean public schools. I think it might be a little easier, possibly for the UCs. I have no idea what places like Michigan and Wisconsin are going to look like. It'll be interesting, but I would say we might see a tick better admissions. If it's more than that, I will be thrilled. And that's it for this episode of Admit It. If you've got questions, email us at admititwithalexis@gmail.com. See you next time. Thanks for tuning in to Admit It with Alexis White. If you're working on your college applications and want guidance every step of the way, visit alexiscollegeexpert.com to find resources and support tailored for you. For even more tips, stories, and college insights, make sure to follow me on TikTok and Instagram @collegeexpert. Until next time, good luck, and remember, you don't have to do this alone.